S.J. Thomason is a religious apologist who runs a channel here on YouTube as well as Christian Apologist blog at christianapologist.com. She recently put out a video titled Why Atheist Deconversion Stories Fail, so I thought we would give it a look as well as possibly browse some related highlights of a discussion I had with her in June. It's a real eye-opener to the sort of way she and many other apologists operate here online.
Hello, you've reached S.J. Thomason with Christian-Apologist.com. Today I'm going to present to you why atheist deconversion stories fail. To persuade people, one should use the tools Aristotle suggested of ethos, establish credibility, pathos, appeal to people's emotions, and logos, apply logic. I have encountered many atheists who have applied Aristotle's formulations to construct their deconversion from Christianity stories. The intention of this video is to deconstruct their stories based on a higher level of the same three formulations.
Okay, well I think you've missed the primary purpose of atheist deconversion stories, sometimes known as coming out stories, which gives you a clue as to what I'm about to discuss. I rarely see said stories presented as tools for deconversion, targeted at the devout. I certainly know that wasn't the purpose of my early deconversion stories on this channel, and the focus of other videos seems to be much the same. Almost all atheist deconversion videos I have seen have been a means of reaching out, either in seeking or offering support. Coming from societies where religion has been forced down everyone's throat for millennia and any challenge to this enforced norm violently opposed, people who end up losing their faith often end up feeling desperately alone. Secular communities were never allowed to form till recently. Secular philosophy was never taught in schools as an alternative to religious narratives till recently. And even now, these things are still being opposed by the religious because they see it as a massive threat. So we have people who have been taught that they need God for morality, meaning and value all of their life, suddenly realizing that there's no justifiable reason to believe in God. That's not a nice place to be in. It's an experience very similar to what LGBT+ individuals whose existence is typically either ignored or worse, actively taught against in education. That's why I describe atheist deconversion stories as coming out, as they very often share the same purpose. When a member of the LGBT+ community creates a video about the fact that they are LGBT+, they don't talk about why they're LGBT+, as ridiculous as a conversation that is. Instead, they talk about the struggles, both internal and external, that they've had to face so far, often asking or offering advice. The same is almost always true of atheist deconversion stories. They read more like survivor stories than counter-apologetics. Sure, a person may express what issue first led them to realize the intellectual hollowness of theism, but often this is mentioned in passing whilst core questions of morality, meaning and value are the focus. It is these things that have allowed for a secular community to form, not simply the opposition to theism. That's why many of the creators I've talked to are not just my work associates who I've never talked to outside of responding to theists. Many of them have grown to become my friends, who offer support, and I in turn offer support to them.
Just as we have witnessed in some sitcoms and news broadcasts, most of the atheist deconversion stories I have heard are rather predictable. They begin with the atheist claiming to have been a devout, sometimes fundamentalist Christian, in an attempt to establish credibility with Christians, appealing to ethos. They follow with a tale of the pain they've unfairly endured based on a horrific event in their lives. This event is often tragic and worthy of much empathy, especially when it involves a death in the family. Through this event, they call on our emotions, pathos. Then they state that God did not answer their prayers, calling on the logic of those who believe God has not answered their prayers either, logos. A second approach using logos is to claim they studied the Bible and 1. The stories of Yahweh in the Old Testament turn them off. 2. The claims about the Messiah cannot be true since they violate our natural laws. And 3. The claims from atheists or agnostics like Richard Carrier, Bart Ehrman, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, Daniel Dennett, and Matt Dillahunty seem reasonable.
Do note that in no way did the emotion you mentioned lead them to abandon God. It merely got them to study the topic further, study the Bible. Indeed, that was the case with me. I studied the Bible after coming to a variety of ethical concerns and found it in wanting of not only morality, but any sort of basis, period. Now, I didn't have internet access at that point in time. I had no knowledge of any of the people you just listed. I only had a little Red Gideon's Bible and a science teacher who went above and beyond in demonstrating the burden of proof. Now, just to stop any accusations here that my science teacher corrupted me against God, he covered the topic of the burden of proof without mentioning God at all. In class, he tried to have us prove that an invisible polar bear did not exist. Every time one of our class of 30 tried to trip him up, he just created an ad hoc response. I suggested thermal goggles. Of course, he'd merely forgotten to mention that the bear was completely thermal insulated. Now, he used a polar bear as we were doing environmental adaptation and it was one of our case studies, so many of our attempts to trip him up involved animal-specific traits. Point is, why should we not adhere to reason? Reason is the very application of evidence and logic to reach a conclusion. Also, I just need to note, Matt Dillahunty didn't study the Bible following a tragedy, he studied the Bible to become a minister.
Atheists use Aristotle's logic to justify themselves, not only to us, but to our Lord. Like the emperor with no clothes, some of them march proudly among their peers in a cloud of pride and ignorance. Yet the Lord sees through them for who they are. He knows the hearts of all in humanity and can easily distinguish the unintentional from the intentional deceivers, just as a farmer could distinguish the wheat from the weeds. The parables of the lost sheep, prodigal son, and tares well explain these distinctions. Romans 1 further explicates that we are all hardwired with the knowledge of our supreme Creator.
You say pride and ignorance, but what is that accusation of ignorance founded upon? You also assert that the fitra, an innate belief in God and their attributes as described in Islam, exists. But what's your basis for this? I spent years studying the very topic and found no evidence to support such a claim. All I did find were entire cultures who not only lacked the very concept of a god, but any word to describe such a being, like the Pirahã people. The only stories they tell that come anywhere close are the ones they can only recite in Pidgin Portuguese, the trade language in that region which both Daniel Everett and Dr. Marco Antonio Goncalves agree is not native to the tribe itself, but a story from one of the nearby tribes. Yet due to the lack of words for such beings existing in the Pirahã language, it has failed to transition to their native tongue. It is stuck in the Pidgin Portuguese.
How should Christians respond to these deconversion stories? We should offer our own conversion testimonies. The most powerful way that we have to share the good news of the resurrection of Jesus Christ is through our testimony of how we determine the good news to be the truth. I was born and raised in a Catholic family, but most in my family left the church in my 20s. I floundered about for 2 decades, bouncing from denomination to denomination, and occasionally studying up on the Eastern faiths. Then I had a very dark spiritual experience that sent chills up my spine and made me realize that God is active, loving, merciful, and powerful. He is both within this universe, immanent, and external to it, transcendent. My son asked to go to church, and we entered a Baptist church just outside of my neighborhood, where I felt overcome by the power of the Holy Spirit. My life transformed, and I was baptized for a second time. I started ambitiously seeking knowledge of the Lord. Around that time, I found myself sitting next to a pastor on a plane who convinced me to read C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity and Great Divorce. The books greatly inspired me, setting me on an upward trajectory towards the way, the truth, and the life. After many years of only having a tiny New Testament and Psalms and Proverbs in my home, I purchased several versions of the Bible for my family. We are all closer to God now, and life has become worth living. As C.S. Lewis said, I believe in Christianity as I believe the sun has risen, not only because I see it, but because by it I see everything else.
I'm sorry, but C.S. Lewis is a dishonest hack who liked to pretend that he was an atheist whilst he was a Christian simply for doubting God. Not disbelieving, simply doubting, questioning. That's apparently equivalent to being an atheist, at least in the mind of C.S. Lewis. If that's how you came to Christianity, then that's not a good sign, but really it's irrelevant as again, these sorts of stories are rarely meant to convince, at least from the secular side. All that matters is one simple thing. Can you prove scientifically that God exists? If not, then I'm not interested in anything else you really have to say. And I get that you'll go back to the assertion that God transcends reality, so I'll say this. That which can impact the universe can be measured by science, even if we don't yet know how to measure it. That which cannot impact the universe can't be measured by science, but since it cannot impact the universe, it's as good as non-existent. Since you claim to have been touched by God, that is an impact upon the universe, and thus God should be measurable by science, so you really have no excuse, and I look forward to your response supplying evidence.
Atheists who call on ethos, pathos, and logos to present their cases only see the naturalistic explanations for the events surrounding them. They fail to see the other half of the world, that which goes beyond this world. They fail to see that which inspires and calls on us to love, forgive, and give thanks. Accordingly, their stories only appeal to our natural experience and fail to appeal to our spiritual sense. They therefore are not credible, ethos, logical, logos, or explanatory of our emotional connection to the Lord, pathos. In this way, they fail miserably. Within each of us lies a moral compass that is not explained by our evolution or natural world. The kingdom of heaven is within us. 2 Corinthians 4:8 says, "So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal."
Great, now if only you could demonstrate any of the bullshit you just asserted is true. Because all you've done is reiterated the very lie that makes said videos so valuable to the secular community in once again pretending like God is some prerequisite for morality, meaning, and value. Hell, even love. You claim it's our ignorance, but the reality is, thus far, it's only your assertion. This was something that came up in a discussion I had with you in June, which was hosted by Godless Cranium and Shannon Q. You kept asserting God is required for some sort of special morality, but when I kept asking for you to show how such a God would allow for morality beyond that of any other dictator, you failed repeatedly, only continuing to assert they could. Now I've taken some highlights from said talk. They're still pretty long, but I feel they cover the main issues rather well. I won't be interjecting as I'm speaking in said conversation.
You're going back to an authoritarian model, and you're claiming that because it's divine, it's objective, but I wonder at which point does that objectivity come in? You know, it's one thing to assert it's objectively moral, it's quite another thing to actually demonstrate it, you know. Would the moral assertions of a dictator, if they declared themselves to be the moral absolute, would that make that objective? What about extraterrestrials moving beyond human? If we can't have human, would that be objective? Moving beyond that, say leprechauns or fairies, if they made moral statements and asserted that that was objective truth, would that be objective truth? Or are you just using objective as a synonym for divine? So sort of to put your foot in the door without any actual basis.
I'm not sure it's really fair to compare the divine to leprechauns and extraterrestrial beings and wonder if those are objective. I'm not sure I'm following what you're asking.
I wonder which point, like what quality about God makes objective, and how can you demonstrate that?
What quality of God makes it? Well, here's the connection. The fact that we have these objective moral duties to treat each other well and to do what's right in our society, the fact that we have that, if we had just shown up on the earth and basically had, and we were just here products of chance and natural selection and those different processes, those different evolutionary processes, there's no reason why people wouldn't maybe value pride, or people wouldn't value selfishness. That why did we come to value things like humility? How did we get like this? And so you wonder that, and you say there are theories that I've seen in biology textbooks about where did altruism come from, and the theory is that social species were given advantages by being altruistic, but that theory is actually not falsifiable. So I could make a theory, I could make an argument that social species were best doing this or doing that. We can look back in our history and we can see times like today. I was doing a lot of study on the Canaanites in the Bible, and these were an atrocious, egregious group of people. The things that they valued, like they would sacrifice their kids routinely when they bought a new house, and they would bury the kid's body inside the house to give them good luck. I mean, that was the kind of value these people had. But and that's one of the reasons, and people talk about some of the things that go on in the Bible, that's one of the reasons why God ordered that culture to be destroyed. The people were sacrificing babies to gods. They were sacrificing infants by burning, and God decided that he had to put an end to that. And the same sort of things were going on in Sodom and Gomorrah. So we've got lots of morally depraved people who've lived in our past, and today I can use my lens looking back on that and make a judgment of I'm actually glad that those people didn't thrive, and I'd like to see the same thing happen to the ISIS groups today, because that's sort of a morally equivalent group of people.
You seem to be avoiding the actual question. Here I ask you specifically, what distinguishes God? What point does it go from just being another dictator, maybe a magic dictator in this case, to being objective morality? There's got to be a distinguishing point. I ask, is it, when you stop being human, as with the aliens? Is it when it stops being, purely material, as with the leprechauns, or are you just using objective as this way to sort of presuppose that your morality has more value than it does?
I think there's a couple of things going on here with that question. I think one question is you're assuming that God is a moral dictator, and you're assuming that if there is a God, and I think I'm getting the idea that you don't think there is a God, but if there is a God, that this God must be a dictator. And I think if you just look at the example of Jesus Christ, you can see that our Lord is not that sort of a leader. He's sacrificed.
What's another word for a command?
I don't think that's what Peter's trying to say, though.
Right.
I think what he's trying to do is he's trying to ask what quality about God makes him objective, makes his commands objective. Like what specific quality about God does it make him objective?
All we have is a believer in God claiming that God, being God, makes him objective. How can I separate that assertion from, say, a neo-Nazi coming along and saying that Hitler was this divinely inspired person who knew moral righteousness? He was a modern philosopher. Hitler was right because he was Hitler, and Hitler was objective because he was Hitler. How do I differentiate between the two of you?
I still find this a very it's an unusual question, because I'm not exactly sure where you're going with this.
I'm just asking where does the objective
you're wondering why
come from?
am I supposed to tell you why I think the Lord is the objective moral lawgiver? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Well,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so again, as I said, societies have come to value things such as being just and being merciful and being kind and being empathetic. And we wonder where these values came from. So we know that the values had to come from an objective moral lawgiver. And the best explanation for this objective moral lawgiver is our Creator.
I'd have to disagree there, because the examples you then use completely contradict your own assertion, because you mentioned that there are tribes that did not have this innate moral state. So clearly there is a complete difference there. So even by your own examples, these values have become, typical. I would not say universal in any sense of the word, let alone objective. They've become typical as shared values in humans because people with these values seem to survive more.
Well, let's go back to, and actually that's the point that you're making. I'm trying to say right now, if we looked around the world, the vast majority of humans, with the exception of the 1% of the population that are considered psychopaths, the vast majority of the world knows exactly what is right and what is wrong. People know that, you're supposed to love your neighbor as yourself. The golden rule is something that permeates all societies. And we can look back right now and objectively make a decision about the Nazis. So you mentioned Adolf Hitler and the Nazis.
Society?
No, we can look back. I'm sorry?
Did the Canaanites have the golden rule?
The Canaanites, no. The Canaanites acted as if they did not have the golden rule. They actually were acting against God's will.
So not all societies, by your own admission, have the golden rule.
I'm saying right now, as the way societies stand today, if we just talk about today's societies,
have the golden rule?
Do they obey the golden rule? No. All people innately within them have a moral compass. Now, some go against their moral compass. Some don't have the proper moral compass, which is what I'm trying to tell you. So there are psychopaths in the world, which is 1% of the world. But there are also people who do these horrible things to other people. They have the inner guidance of a moral compass. They just don't follow their moral compass. We're held accountable, of course, to our government and to our families and to other people, but we also feel like we're held accountable to God. And that's the big thing that distinguishes us, because we feel like, we could sneak around and do stuff in the back. And we know that, if I go and I cheat on my husband, which I'll never do, but if I did do that, and he never found out, I would know that one day God is going to hold me accountable for that action. And so that's something that distinguishes the two.
But what right does God have to judge us? The idea of a infinite being judging crippled, finite beings that they deliberately crippled at the start, is foul to the thought. It really does boggle the mind again. And there's so many things that are popping up that are just like, I don't understand how this has stood for so long in theology. What does God have to judge? They spent 3 days inconvenienced, and apparently that's equivalent to, the suffering a person who has been raped as a child has felt, for example. It doesn't come anywhere near, And you may say, oh, well, of course, omnipotent, they can see into the mind of everyone. But yes, they can also, give themselves enough power that it doesn't affect them. It's one part knocks on another, and it's just like watching Christians trying to plug cracks in the dam with their fingers, plug one and then another one spouts out, and you go plug that, and then you keep trying to plug more. It's just, the more you push, the more it just comes out.
Yeah.
Imagine a world in which we didn't have external accountability. Imagine the sort of a world that we would have if people could get away with raping.
I'm accountable to my peers.
Yeah, but what if you decided, I think I'm going to be a jerk. I'm going to go steal from this person. I'm going to go.
I'm still accountable to my peers.
Well, what if your peers don't find out that you did the stealing? Who's going to hold you accountable?
I admit that's a failure of the system. But adding a mythical possible solution doesn't then make yours any superior. That's the problem. Adding the maybe, I may as well say, oh, all thieves get their fingers cut off by the scissor man. That is much.
I think here's what it is. We appreciate both forgiveness and we appreciate God's justice. So we appreciate the fact that, just like with a real father, your real father is, if you did, like, say, for example, I decided to admit at the age of 30, I tell my dad, I said, hey, by the way, when I was 18 years old in your house, I threw a party when you and mom went out of town and a bunch of friends came over. And my dad, and I would expect that because I fessed up that he would forgive me. Now, what if he didn't forgive me? And that would be pretty bad. Now, what if I went in there and I did something horrible and maybe I crashed my dad's car driving drunk, something terrible happened, all kinds of horrible things happened, and he didn't punish me. Something's wrong in a system where there's no punishment for bad actions.
And we have that punishment in place, but just because it doesn't happen in every instance, because sadly, for example, some gunmen will take their own lives at a killing spree. Sadly, they will never face justice. That does not then give cause to come along and invent fictional reasons. Again, I go back to the scissor man. Every thief has their fingers cut off by the scissor man once they reach the end of their life. That doesn't make it true. You may want it to be true in some weird way. But going back to the idea of hell, and I know you don't seem to agree with a literal interpretation of hell. Is that correct, would you say?
Christians have different views on this, but I can say, Catholics think, for example, there's purgatory, but all Christians have the view that there is a final judgment. At least all Christians that I know have a view that there's a final judgment, because it says it pretty clearly in the book of Revelation. And it does mention the lake of fire in the book of Revelation at the final judgment. So I do know that. What I don't know is exactly what the lake of fire is. Is that symbolizing something? And that's what I don't know. I don't know if it's symbolizing something.
Will it be eternal like heaven, or temporary?
That's another good question, because in two different places in the Bible, they talk about what's going to happen. People who have aligned themselves with Satan, it makes quite clear in the book of Revelation that they're going to burn in the lake of fire forever. It's a forever eternal thing. However, Jesus makes clear that there's the possibility that a soul could be destroyed. And so at the final judgment again, some souls that had not aligned themselves with Satan could be destroyed, and other ones could end up being eternally punished. And that's consistent with what it says in the scriptures.
Right, okay. But focusing just on those who have, quote, aligned themselves with Satan, what finite crime could ever justify infinite torture? And I ask this as someone who fully understands the idea of rage and anger. I come from a perspective that the justice system is not about vengeful wrath. It's about, first of all, rectifying an issue if possible, and then also correcting the person if that is possible.
So it seems that your own moral system is less secure than you like to pretend. Now, this is where things begin to get really interesting, as SJ decided to go back to some of the things I'd mentioned, and I offered my own lived experience on the topic as someone who's lived through said atrocity.
Okay, let me answer that with your finite question, because I actually just wrote a blog on that. I've written blogs on all these topics, actually, which is kind of nice that I'm able to draw from that. You have to ask, you say a finite crime, but let's visualize some of the kinds of crimes you've actually mentioned tonight. Say, for example, a man rapes a child.
I'm a person who's been raped. I'm fully happy to talk about my own experience there. I was raped as a child.
Okay.
What you are forwarding is atrocious.
Well, can I finish what my example?
Don't use me as your example.
I'm not using you as my example. I actually have a friend who also was raped as a child, and she wrote a book. So I'm using her example.
Now watch how SJ dealt with this revelation, a fact that influenced my rather scathing closing remarks for said discussion.
So if a man rapes a child, the child, it's going to be like a ripple effect, because the child is never going to forget that. This is going to be something that influences the child's life, and then it might influence the children's lives. It might actually keep going down through society. It might influence all kinds of other people who also were affected by this person and the types of actions that both people took. So the person who committed the crime, who raped the child, actually committed something that's not a finite crime at all. Yes, it's an infinite crime.
One day the sun will burn up. Yes or no?
Yes.
Our species will not live on. Or if we've traveled to other bodies, we might live on, but eventually all stars will burn up. There will be an end to the universe. Heat death will occur. Entropy will be reached. There will be a finite limit to our existence. Correct?
There's a finite limit to the existence of the galaxies, the existence of the solar system, yes.
Right. Now
I wanted to say that God is, God is also, when I mentioned he's transcendent and he's immanent, he's also in this universe with us as an immanent Lord, but he's transcended. He goes beyond it. And that's how we explain the whole idea of, what is beyond the universe, is beyond time, space, and matter, and that's God. So if we're with God eternally, we would also be in this unbounded time, away from time, space, and matter.
That means the people who have suffered sexual assault suffer sexual assault in heaven, right?
No, that's not what that means.
But where is the crime continuing then? If when they go to heaven, the pain inflicted upon them from the sexual assault stops, right? That's cut off and in the finite universe, and it no longer continues in heaven. Where is the infinite continuation?
The infinite continuation is, it's a crime against God. And so the infinite continuation would be in the infinite presence of God.
Sorry. There's not enough.
If a rapist rapes somebody, you're committing an infinite crime, because the infinite crime will always be in the infinite mind of God.
God can get over it for all I care.
S.J. Thomason has a clear problem and it needs calling out. She seems to believe that she knows everyone's mind better than they do, whether it be an atheist whose motives and reasoning she claims to have a superior insight on, or in rape-splaining the trauma of child rape to someone with that lived experience. S.J. Thomason doesn't seem to have any sense of humility at all. If she wants to assert something about your experience or your thoughts, she will, and if you deny it, then she'll either talk at you about what you think, or she'll just ignore you and talk past you to the audience. And I can't tell which of these is actually worse. Now, I've referenced the discussion below as always, and it's well worth the watch as there are several points I couldn't include here. But returning to S.J. Thomason, she seriously needs to put an end to her bad habit. I don't know if she got struck by the C.S. Lewis bug of rewriting the opposition, or simply came to it as a naturally occurring straw man. But if she wants to have any chance of a discussion in good faith, she needs to do away with it. I don't believe S.J. Thomason is a mind reader, and I know she's been called out on these things before. She just doesn't seem to care, meaning that S.J. Thomason as an apologist is little more than your run-of-the-mill liar. She seems to give off a friendly charisma that gives her the appearance of being warm and open, but she's cold to the core. We saw this in both the discussion I had with her, as well as the reference to atheists as weeds among the wheat. It's all glamour, it's all charm, it's entirely fake, and nothing more.
Hi there. I'd just like to say a few things here at the end of the video before you go. First of all, I'd like to thank everyone who's ever donated to the channel via Patreon, giving a special thanks to the following people: Hannah Banghart, Matthew Kovac, John Schoenrock, Daniel Martinez, and Alexander Williams. Your support has ensured this channel's ability to grow over the years. I'd also like to ask that you comment down below and like this video, as well as subscribe, hit the bell icon, and follow Essence of Thought on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Please also consider following Atheist Alliance International on Facebook, a humanist organisation dedicated to helping atheists around the globe. Any comments utilising language which insults others on the basis of perceived gender, sexuality, ethnicity or ability both mental and physical will be removed immediately, and the commenter may be blocked on the moderator's discretion. Let's work to keep this space one which upholds the values of humanism. Thank you.